Welcome back, welcome back. For the first time, tanks were deployed on Syrian streets this week, with reports of indiscriminate firing on demonstrators. Human rights groups say that at least 400 people have now been killed in 6 weeks of protests. This comes a week after President Al-Assad had lifted the hated emergency laws which had been in place for 48 years. But with little sign of change on the ground, what next for Syria? I'm joined now by Ribal Al-Assad, chairman of the Organization for Democracy and Freedom in Syria. He's a controversial figure. He's also President Al-Assad's first cousin, and he's in exile here in London. Some of the supporters or spokesmen and so on of the current regime have suggested that you are behind these protests that we've seen, brave protests in Syria and so on. Did you organize part of?
Of course not. I mean, the Syrian television channel and the Dunya channel, which also belongs to the Syrian, I mean Syrian stooges, and Al-Manar, as you have seen, Al-Manar, which belongs to Hezbollah, and different Lebanese MPs and others. I mean, Syria has all their stooges moving around trying to blame me for what's happening. I mean, this is completely nonsense. You know, the Syrian government should have understood, you know, that first the people in Tunisia rose up against their dictators because they couldn't take it anymore. Then people in Egypt did the same thing. And then Libya, then Yemen. I mean, the Syrian government had time, you know, to do reforms, to move towards reforms, but they did not. They refused to see it. They were still going on television and saying, "We are different from those countries. We are not Tunisia and Egypt. You know, the people love us, and we, you know, they understand that we are a country of resistance." I mean, this is completely nonsense. You know, people are very smart today in Syria. They know very well what resistance are they talking about. You know, Syria hasn't been in a. We had the state of emergency since 1963. I mean, since 1973, there wasn't any war, you know, with Syria.
So in terms of President Al-Assad, who's there in the job at the moment, would you say that he is safe in his position, or would you say that he may not last another 3 months as leader of Syria?
Syria is completely different from those other countries, and as you know, Iran would never allow the Syrian regime to fall, because through Syria they control Hezbollah, they control Hamas, they control part of Iraq, they control, I mean, you know, and it's also for them strategically very important because it's their front lines of defense.
And what about the days ahead, though? Do you think the president will survive?
I mean, at the moment, the situation is sustained, but it's not sustainable. Right. You know, for how long? Right. For how long are they going to continue to oppress people? Is that a solution to, you know, to repress your own people or to use violence against your own people? You know, how long is it going to last for? At the end of the day, you know, it could last a month, 2, 3, or a year, but it's impossible. It's unsustainable. People will not accept that anymore.
So they will continue to rebel?
Of course, the people will continue to rebel. People cannot take this life anymore. People cannot live under oppression anymore, and mostly when they've seen that all people around them are, you know, getting their freedoms.
They want the freedom themselves.
That's a normal, you know, we are born free, and this is what people want. This is their rights. I don't understand why the regime is not understanding that. And again, when people started, you know, demonstrating in Syria, as we all remember, they were only chanting slogans against corruptions. You know, they wanted reforms. They were not chanting things for regime change. But of course, when you used violence against them, and we warned against that, and the regime didn't listen. When you use violence against people, people are not going to accept it. When you have a cousin or a neighbor or a friend or a brother or a father or mother, you know, it's horrible. How could they forget that?
So that in fact, these tough measures that they seem to have opted for in the last few days, after toying apparently to go more liberal, but now they've gone down the hard line. Yes. You think that does not suppress the people you know, the friends you know, the people who are protesting? It increases the number of people.
Of course it increases, and it increases all people, you know, people to go out in the street all over Syria. There's not like one sect or one people that is, that lives better than the other. Everybody is, lives in poverty. Everybody lives suppressed. They arrest people from all sects. There are only few at the top who are taking advantage of the, of the present regime.
So what could the rest of the world, the international community, Britain, America, France, whoever it is, what could they actually do to help now, to help the cause of freedom in Syria? What could they do to help?
They have to continue their pressure on the Syrian regime, and they have to tell them that there's, those reforms that you've talked about, they have to be implemented right away. You have to allow people to participate in the political life. There has to be a government of national unity. They have to have a roundtable dialogue with everybody. Some people would tell you there have been problems in the past. Well, the past is the past. Nobody's asking people to forget the past. We always learned from our mistakes in the past. But today we have to forgive. We have to build the future. A future of a country cannot be built on hatred, and grudges. It has to be built on love and forgiveness. That's the way we'll be able to move forward and build Syria together.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, sir. It was a great honor to meet you.
5 weeks ago, as the intervention in Libya began, Britain's House of Commons voted to participate in the action. And here on Frost Over the World, we brought together both sides of the argument. The respected Conservative MPs, one Rory Stewart, who voted with the government, and John Barron, who voted against. I asked them both what might make them change their minds. Was there indeed anything that would change their minds?
What would make me change my mind and regret my decision to vote in favour is if we got tempted to go in deeper. And there are lots of temptations out there which it's difficult for us to anticipate now. So if we began to exaggerate our fears of Gaddafi or exaggerate our sense of moral obligation and feel forced to put troops in on the ground so that we ended up in another Iraq-style situation, then I certainly would regret my decision, regret my inability to predict that a UN resolution, which should be about protecting civilians, could so easily be dragged into other things.
For me, I don't think I'm going to change my mind on this for 2 reasons. One, I still believe that with extra prodding from the West, Egypt could put a no-fly zone into Benghazi and has the military capability to do so, to cover the civilian angle with regards to Benghazi. But secondly, we have got to be consistent about this. Rory quite rightly makes the point that, we want to be on the side of progress. So be on the side of progress, but for goodness sake, let's be consistent about this. Otherwise, we could lay ourselves open to the charge of hypocrisy.
And what, 5 weeks later, do you feel about that now, John?
Nothing has happened in these 5 weeks that's made me change my mind. If anything, I think my view has been reinforced in the sense that I think we've certainly had mission creep, if one was being charitable. One was being uncharitable. I think regime change was on the cards from the beginning. And that's what worries me about this, is that we are perhaps being a bit more drawn in. It is quite clear from the joint statement by the 3 leaders, from the rejection of the African Union peace proposals, and indeed from the deployment of military advisors on the ground, that Britain, France and the US will not be satisfied with anything short of Gaddafi's removal. In anybody's language, that is regime change. And I think a number of us feel very uncomfortable with that.
Right, let me turn to Rory, who you supported the motion, as it were, in the House of Commons. Has anything happened that would change your mind, or has changed your mind?
I think we've been quite cautious, so the answer is no. At the moment, we have been very limited. Boots haven't gone onto the ground. There's been no attempt to deploy an occupying army. This remains primarily a humanitarian operation. It is true, of course, that we want to get rid of Gaddafi, but we're not mounting an invasion to get rid of him. We're very, very much hoping that he's going to go, but our primary obligation under the UN is to protect the civilians in Benghazi and more recently in Misrata.
But has there been any mission creep in the last 5 weeks that has concerned you?
Yes, I have been concerned, but I think we're still on the right side of the argument. I don't think we've gone too far. But you're absolutely right. We have now put some military advisors on the ground, very few in fact, and there have been attacks on Gaddafi's compound. Those are things that cause me anxiety. If they were to go too far, if we were to get into a military operation directed against toppling regime, I think that would be a mistake. But I think at the moment we're on the right side of the argument.
What about the situation now looking at another world crisis in Syria. What should be our attitude to Syria, in fact, at this moment in time? John?
Well, if there is to be consistency, then we've got to be quite robust. I mean, one of the reasons, if not, it could be argued the main reason we went in was humanitarian aid into Libya. Well, some of us were asking the question at the time, where does this policy lead? Why don't we instigate no-fly zones in Bahrain, the Yemen, and perhaps even Syria? If we're not clear about this, about the line we're taking, then it leads you off in a direction where it's very difficult to be consistent. But I think as a government we've been reasonably strong on this, and that we've condemned the violence, we've called in the ambassador, etc., etc. But I do think it begs the question why we were willing to put in a no-fly zone and intervene in Libya when we haven't been willing to do as much in these other regions where very similar situations occur, and that is an autocratic leader is putting down his own population, in some cases using arms supplied by the West. Why Libya? And a number of Arab commentators, a number of people here suggest it's perhaps because he wasn't friendly, Colonel Gaddafi, wasn't friendly to the West, and there may be oil interests involved. These are questions that still linger and need answering.
And what do you feel about this, and that there's no-fly zones in
Well, I disagree
in Syria?
Fundamentally with John. I think the situation in Syria is very different from that in Libya. It's different in two respects. We do not have strong international support, still less Arab League support, which is what we had in Libya for that kind of intervention. And we simply don't have the capacity for that kind of intervention. So without those two things, what we're doing in Syria is the correct thing, which is we're isolating the regime, we're condemning the regime for what it's doing. I'd like to see targeted sanctions at the Syrian leadership. We don't want the president, the generals coming shopping in London and Paris. I think attacking them in that way will hit them hard, and we need to make it clear that they've completely overstepped the mark, and the last 10 years of rapprochement is over.
What do you feel about that?
I mean, I'd agree with Rory in one respect. I mean, I certainly am not advocating a no-fly zone for Syria, but I wouldn't have advocated or didn't advocate a no-fly zone for Libya. I'm just highlighting the fact that there is an inconsistency here, which is very hard to explain, which sort of reinforces, in my view, the argument why we should not have intervened in Libya. Because if you can't have consistency in your policy, then you've got to be very careful how you go forward and implement these issues like no-fly zones and other issues as well. I think it's a question of, what is the end game in Libya? One of the reasons a number of us were concerned about the intervention is that if there's a stalemate on the ground, and this is where it looks as though it's at the moment in Libya, where do we go from here? What is the end game? What is the exit strategy? And I still think we're debating that. Meanwhile, civilian casualties are mounting.
Do you agree on that?
No, I disagree. You'd be surprised to hear.
Yes.
I disagree with John because I think he's searching for a kind of consistency which is almost impossible in the real world and in foreign affairs. There is not one size fits all that you can take to Syria and Libya simultaneously. There are three things you look at again and again. What's happening on the ground, how much international support do you have, and what can you do? And on those criteria, those two situations are different. As for the question on what the end game is in Libya, to some extent we've achieved in Benghazi what we set out to achieve, which is to protect civilians. A no-fly zone is not an intervention, it's not an invasion, it's not designed to topple a regime. It's designed to protect people, and I think that is what we achieved.
And in the headlines this weekend, one of your students.
It's fantastic news. Prince William's wedding. I was very honoured to get an invitation to the wedding. An incredibly exciting day.
There we are. Exciting day. Important subject. Thank you both very much indeed. A million thanks. In 2007, four boys formed a pop opera band on the social networking site Facebook. In under a year, they picked up the gong for Best Album at the Classical Brit Awards, and they've not looked back since. They've become a classical sensation, pushing boundaries, infusing their operatic sounds with more modern song choices. They've just released a new ballad, All of Me, not in fact anything to do with the one that goes on, Why Not Take All of Me, but a song about love and commitment to coincide with the royal wedding. And to celebrate that happy event, the boys earlier joined me here in the studio. But first, a quick peep at their new song, All of Me. And there they were performing magically there. Blake, no connection with Billie Holiday, who did the original All of Me.
Oh no, another great jazz standard. No, it's a great song, I know it, but no, this is very much a new beast. This is was written a couple of years ago by a gentleman called Simon May, who's a famous songwriter in this country. Actually wrote EastEnders, Knock on Wood, Howard's Way, things like that. And he's been following us for a while. And this is actually a song that has been in the wedding charts in the States. Yes, they have a wedding chart.
Do they have a wedding chart?
And it's been there. It's been very popular for a few years. And he really wanted someone to record a definitive version. So he came to us at the end of last year. We were doing a charity concert for the Prince's Trust in the Royal Festival Hall, and he came in and said, "Look, this is my song. Would you like to sing it?" And we said, "Absolutely."
Very nice way of celebrating. And in terms of this appropriately timed song, it was you that was actually at St Andrews as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I was. I was at St Andrews for 4 years, and I studied history of art alongside Will and Kate. Obviously, Will changed to geography halfway through, but Kate saw the course through, and I had a wonderful 4 years. Yeah.
And were they able to have a more private romance than they probably could have had in London or somewhere like that?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, looking back on the time at St Andrews, I find it hard to think of any other university which would be more perfect as a place for Will to be, because he was really able to live a pretty normal life up there, and it was, I always describe it as very much as a bubble. He had a protective group of friends around him, and there was a group of about 20 of us, and he was able to live his life, and you know, it wasn't the kind of place where people would run up to him in the street and ask for his autograph or anything like that. You know, it was sort of quite a conservative, understated place, and he was left to his own devices, really.
Well, that's magical. A stroke of luck, isn't it? Big stroke.
And I think, you know, because there was that agreement with the press that they would leave him alone as well. So there were no photographers around or anything, and obviously it was our graduation ceremony that on the last day there were sort of banks of photographers, and I think we all felt that the bubble had rather burst, and that he was then having such a real life, as it were.
Yeah. So that but anyway, the happy ending is today, in fact.
Yes,
indeed. And you met them probably later, Stephen, did you?
Well, to be honest, we're very, very lucky in what we do. We get to perform all over the world, and we've performed in some incredible situations at Twickenham Stadium, at Wembley, and occasionally at polo events as well. And that was at a polo event that I initially bumped into Kate, who's incredibly sweet, very, very nice girl. And I guess it's always about bumping into people in their own circles. And I'm not a polo player, far from it. I'm trying to learn how to play it, but I'm terrible. Ollie's a lot better. But they seemed in the short time I met them to be extremely genuine couple, you know, that there was no big bravado, there was no pretense for the cameras. It was just two young people having fun together, and that's exactly what they should be at this point in their lives.
I think that's a key thing for people who don't know them, is that they come across and are extremely down to earth, extremely level-headed people, and Kate especially, and I think that's why they're so attractive to the general public, because people feel in a certain way they can relate to them, where before with a royal couple they're in another world completely.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's been a growth in interest that was greater than predicted, probably. And you shared some education.
I did. I was at the same school as Kate, and I sort of grew up in the same part of the world as Will and Harry.
Obviously, it was not a girls' school.
No, Marlborough was not. It was very much
to a girls' school. He was the exception.
I did. I was the exception, not the rule. But yeah, it was a big school. But she was a very nice girl even then. I wouldn't pretend to have known her particularly well. As I say, 160 people in my year. So you know, that's getting on for huge. But she's but I've seen her around and about.
And you were just.
Of course, yeah. I was far too uncool to be hanging around with kids like that. So yeah.
You were uncool. I think you're all rather cool. What are you going to do next? Are you going to focus on more of the, well, not what you popper, of the mixture. The key is the mixture.
Well, the key, I think the key,
the potency.
The key for us is harmony and musicality, and creating music that moves people and touches people. So we're just starting work on our 4th album, which is very exciting, which is going to be very much about the voices. And we're combining that with tours in China and UK tours, hopefully the US and Canada. So it's a busy year ahead, but just focusing on making great music that people would enjoy.
The Moon, you could sing
well,
from
we
the
are
moon.
going to speak to Branson, see if we can be the first classical boy band on the moon.
Okay, well that's a great ambition, and we're going to have a bit of joy here, which is we're going to hear the lads in action. As you can see, there's not room for an orchestra in the background here, but a cappella is perfect, and so are they. What could we hear?
Well, we're going to hear, you're going to hear, hopefully, we're going to sing a wonderful Leonard Cohen song that I think the whole world knows very well now. We've been singing it for about 4 years and it's become ever more popular in that time. This is Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah.
Perfect.
Well, I've heard there was a secret chord that David played and it pleased the Lord, but you don't really care for music, do you? Well, it goes like this, a fourth to fifth, the minor fall, the major lift, the baffled king composing, hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah.
I, William Arthur Philip Louis, King Catherine and Catherine Elizabeth, to my wedded wife.
For better, for worse.
There was a time you let me know what's really going on below, but now you never show it to me, do you? But remember when I moved in you, the holy dove was moving too, and every breath we drew was hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Maybe there's a God above, but all I ever learned from love was how to shoot somebody who outdrew you. And it's not a cry you can hear at night. It's not somebody who's seen the light. It's a chord and it's a broken hallelujah. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah.
Well, I'd better do the applause because I'm the only person here, but that was great. Thank you very much indeed. The message of hallelujah on this happy day.